Yeah, we introduced the Community History Award 3 years ago now because we wanted to recognise great work being done on community-based projects in New South Wales and the ACT. It was an idea of our former President Masako Fukui, and it's really built year by year. So we had the most entries ever this year, which is great. So today I'm happy, we're kind of combining agenda items 8 and 9 in that we're having two recipients of recognition in the award this year presenting short presentations about their winning projects. And so I might begin, Anne, if it's okay for us to start with you, because this year the judges decided to award a special commendation, and that is to Anne Howard for her book, Eisteddfod to Stage, The Ryde Eisteddfod, 30 Amazing Years, 1988 to 2018. And the judges were really impressed by just the enormous amount of work that went into producing this really beautiful book. And in particular, the level of engagement with the community of entertainers, performers, musicians, directors, producers, and audience members to whom the Ryde Eisteddfod is such an important annual event. And it was really clear that this is an important project that is highly valued by the community whose history it tells. So Anne, if I can hand over to you to talk a little bit about your project, and congratulations on the special commendation this year.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for your commendation. I really value that, and it's always nice to get recognition because most of the time you're slaving away with just yourself as the mentor and the critic and everything else. I've had about 20-something books published, and I do short stories and other creative things, but I love doing social history, and I like to write about hidden histories. Although I started off as an academic, I got a couple of masters, but I turned my back on academia because I think everybody has a story, and quite often important stories aren't told. So the books that I've done were mostly suggested to me by somebody who represented a whole group of people that are not known. For instance, A Carefree War is about child migrants who were Australian, were sent away from the coast in World War II. Now, a lot of people don't know about that, but there were lots and lots of them, thousands of them, and they went through the whole of society. There's a picture of Kerry Packer, who was one of them that was sent away for fear of Japanese invasion for 3 years. And I wrote 2 books on child migrants from Barbados, and again interviewed, I don't know how many, I can't remember how many, something like 80 different migrants. And this one, You'll Be Sorry, which was a runner-up for the Society of Women Writers Award, is on its second print, and that is about the women who wanted to join up in World War II to help fight and weren't let into the army, and then 26,000 of them became invaluable. So that's the sort of work that I do. This particular book was a commission from Ryde, and they asked me to do it because I do a lot of honorary work for the arts, and I just feel that one of our most important assets is young children with talent. And when they asked me to do this book, the theme that emerged was that just in this one little suburb, well, it's not so little, but I mean comparatively little, small focus really, there were these children who were so magnificently talented, like this one who was voted one of the 10 best violinists in the world in China at his age, and is now in London with a professor studying. And what emerged was that when they went in as little frightened 5-year-olds or 6-year-olds for their first try on the stage, they were so frightened and, you know, anxious to please and everything. They are now running the Vienna Philharmonic. They are dancing in San Francisco. They are the cream, and Australia should be so proud of them. He didn't look like that when he was 5, but This was a tremendously difficult book to write because there were no archives, and I had 30 years and I had thousands of entrants in all these different genres to make a fair representation. So all I had was a box of programs, and they were just lists of names. And if you're trying to track somebody from, you know, 2001 or 1999, especially if it's a female, because they changed their surnames, they changed countries. It was a tremendously, but very exciting and very challenging. And I couldn't have done it without email and Google, and I couldn't have done it without the different talent people, the managers who knew a lot of people, had a lot of contacts. And I had a lot of contacts because I've done a lot of honorary work in the arts. So really it was such a buzz to find somebody in Munich and track them back when they were in their 40s and track them back to when they'd appeared age 6.5 in one of the Eisteddfod classes. And so I must say, although I agree with you, it was a huge amount of work. I got up at 5 o'clock every morning and did 2 hours for a year, except for Christmas Day, to do this book. And I never gave up because I was like a terrier. Once I got on a trail, I tracked them and tracked them and tracked them. And the front cover illustrates what I'm saying about these children who became absolute icons, because that's Simon Tedeschi. If you're into music, you would have heard of him. That's him now. That's him as a little wide-eyed boy. And these children said to me, as adults, that it was walking onto the Eisteddfod stage, being judged by musicians and having an audience that made them realise what talent they had. And otherwise, they might never have followed that path in their life. So that's about it. So any questions? I'll show you my favourite picture. They're so talented, these people, really. Some of them, one was taken up by the English Ballet. Straight away they saw him. Just marvellous. Any questions?
It's just wonderful, Anne.
It is. It's a really beautifully produced book, and yeah, the sense that comes from it is how valued it will be by the community that it is speaking about, and it just gives this great sense of, yeah, exactly what you're talking about, Anne, about where people have gone to from that first experience on stage at the Eisteddfod.
Well, I think the importance of taking people's oral history is that I found with these other books, the theme emerges from talking to so many people. I interviewed about 90 people for this book. She got 100%. Nobody gets 100%. Madeline Wong got 100%. I mean, just look at the line. I mean, just fantastic. People just sat there in silence after she danced. And the theme of this, as I say, is Eisteddfod, very, very important. And all these children that go in, thousands of them go in, and then from that emerges this burgeoning talent, which is appreciated all around the world. Oh, I got, what's his name, Richard Bonning. I got him to endorse the book, and he was very difficult to get because he'd gone to ground in New York. I went through Switzerland to New York, and he's jealously guarded by New York matrons. And the only way I could get to him was I wrote a letter on my best notepaper. In fact, I bought some special notepaper and wrote a beautiful letter in handwritten, and I managed to get through to him. And then he said, superlative work over the last 30 years, discovering young artists of the future. So that was a real bonus. It just makes you so happy when you score something like that, doesn't it?
That's great. Thanks, Anne. It's lovely to hear more about the process, and congratulations again. Thank you.
And this one, I'll just add that you'll be sorry. These women didn't know what they could do when they eventually got into the army. And this really is the beginning of feminism, because the army gave them intelligence tests and aptitude tests because they wanted to know who they were getting. So these women found out they could do all sorts of wonderful things, which if they just stayed at home as they were told, they would never have known this. So this is why it's in its second print. I think this book is really quite a special book because they've all gone now, these women. I think there's one left, well into her 90s. So if I hadn't interviewed them, that would all have been lost, all that wonderful testimony to the change in women's lives.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah. Do you have like actual tapes of their voices, or is it all transcribed?
I wrote 2 books about these women in the 90s, and I don't think we had tapes then.
Right.
I did it all by voice, and then I wrote out what I thought they told me and gave it to them, and they signed off and said I had permission to use it. So it was done in a very, very simple way. I actually like talking to people face to face because there's this kind of, how would you describe it? There's almost a physical distance where sometimes you need to wait for a long time for somebody to tell you something, especially if it's very important to them. And I think that's difficult to do artificially. So I remember when I wrote this book, there was a 90-year-old man, and he sat in my studio. He came to my studio, but he sat there for ages before speaking, and then he started crying and he said, "Nobody cuddled me when I was a little boy." Now, that opened up a whole lot of things about how they were treated very well in a clinical way, but they weren't cuddled. Like, children are very tactile and it hurts them. It hurts their lives if they're just cleaned and fed and put in a cot and then picked up and cleaned and fed. So those kind of remarks, very, very important. And if I hadn't sat there very quietly without engaging his eyes and just let him feel comfortable and then speak, I wouldn't have got that story. Yeah.
Thank you.
I know there's all these technical things that you can use now, but I think nothing compares with just sitting on a park bench and listening to somebody, really.
No. And where can we get your book? This
one?
Yeah.
Oh, they've got a website. I don't handle the sales of it. So I think I gave one. Did I send one to you? I think I did for, yes, I sent 2 copies, I think. So you should have them in your library.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks again, Anne.
My pleasure.
So we'll move on to delighted to announce the winner of the award for this year, and that is the Cowra Voices project. And the Cowra Voices project is an app-based project that gives visitors, excuse me, to Cowra access to a beautifully produced audio history of the area. I'll just read one of the comments from the judges about the project, which said, geolocative, excuse me, geolocative storytelling apps are a very exciting space for oral history's future, and this one, based around a specific place and event, centers grassroots peace building and the Japanese diaspora. Its rationale and execution are admirable and necessary. The project team has a long-standing and fruitful history of collaboration with Cowra Council and the Cowra community. The outcome also includes multiple sections of the community: youth, Indigenous peoples, ethnic minority women. Furthermore, they've been able to appeal to both locals and tourists and build transnational connections. So we've got several people from the Cowra Voices project have been able to join us today, which is wonderful. And congratulations to you all on being the winners of the Community History Award this year. So perhaps a round of reactions, applause. And I'm going to hand over to Masako Fukui, who is going to tell us a bit more about the Cowra Voices project.
Okay, thanks, Scott. I'm going to share a screen. Oh, is that working? Can you see the screen? No, not really. No. Okay, it doesn't look like I can share, Kylie. Is that working?
There we are. That's worked.
Okay. So I actually wanted to just share this bit, but that's okay. Sorry about the bit at the side, but we're all family here. So thank you so much. My name is Masako Fukui. I just wanted to thank Oral History New South Wales for this award on behalf of the Cowra Voices team. We've got Lawrance Ryan here, who's going to speak a bit later, so I won't introduce him now, but Jackie Schultz, who was like the manager of our project, Chia Muraoka, who did the technical aspects, and Mayu Kanamori, who did the photography, and actually she did everything, she was a facilitator. And one person who can't be here today is Irene Ridgway. She couldn't join us today. So Cowra Voices, as Scott said, is a geolocative audio storytelling app. It tells a unique story of peace and reconciliation. As most of you know, Cowra is the home of the Cowra Breakout, which was a mass escape by Japanese prisoners of war, resulting in the deaths of nearly 240 people. So Cowra is actually the only place to experience armed confrontation with an enemy on Australian soil during World War II. Yet for some reason, the people of Cowra have forged this really enduring and close friendship with the people of Japan. So today, Cowra is the home of the Japanese Gardens, which many of you would know, the World Peace Bell, and of course the Japanese Cemetery. And there are numerous student, artistic and cultural exchanges that bring Japanese people to Cowra from Japan and Cowra people to Japan as well. And I think that's pretty unique for a little country town of around 12,000 people. But what visitors to Cowra probably don't know are the very small stories of grassroots peace building that have led to this really strong bond of friendship between former enemies. Cowra Voices documents these stories, and they're all narrated by the people of Cowra, as you can see here in this slide. There are 19 voices in all, including the voices of the Wiradjuri people, the traditional custodians of the land. So our aim of Cowra Voices was to link people and history to place, hence the geolocative functions. And as Cowra begins to welcome visitors again, the Cowra Voices app is doing exactly that. And you hear a little bit more about this from Lawrance. I feel like this award affirms our belief that these stories actually belonged not just to Cowra people, but to all Australians. And our hope is that listening to the stories in Cowra Voices will give an opportunity for other people to be kind of folded into this peace and reconciliation narrative that began in Cowra such a long time ago. I just want to introduce you to the funding bodies. Of course, we couldn't finish it without the money that they gave us, but also the support. I've got to say, every one of the funding bodies were really supportive of the project, and various people who I can't acknowledge now, but there are various people from each organization that just gave us this really strong encouragement. And the same goes for the partners. We had partners in Cowra, but also here in Sydney. And as you can see there, Tokai University, which is a university in Hokkaido in Japan. And in this photo, you see those young people. They're from Tokai University in Hokkaido, and they came to Cowra a few years ago to learn Cowra history that they hadn't ever heard of before. And one of their tasks when they got back to Japan was to submit some design ideas, and they were incorporated into the app. And that was our way of incorporating or folding into this Cowra story, the younger generation of Japanese people who probably who had never heard of Cowra before, didn't even know the POW camp existed, never knew about the breakout. So that was a fantastic initiative that grew out of some connections that Chia Muraoka, one of our team members, had. So that was great. That animated person standing in the middle, that's Lawrance Ryan. And I just want to introduce Lawrence to you today because he's here all the way from Cowra. Lawrence has the title of Grants and Executive Projects Officer at Cowra Council. Cowra Council was both funding body and partner in this project. And Lawrence, probably of all the people in Cowra, even though a lot of people supported us, he was the one that was with us every step of the way, right from the very beginning, in the development, in the production, in the testing. And now he's probably the one person in Cowra that uses this app the most. So I'd like to hand over to, just before I do, here's where you go to download the app. It's a free app, and I hope you get to listen to the stories. So cowravoices.org. So I'm going to hand over to Lawrence, who's somewhere. There he is. And thank you. Thank you very much, Oral History New South Wales.
And thank you, Masako, for passing over to me and letting me tell a little bit of how Cowra Voices has changed Cowra and continues to change Cowra, because, yes, as you said, I work for Cowra Council. I've worked there for 9 years, but I've been involved with telling the Cowra story for a long while. Now, I began doing tours around town back in 1990, and I estimate that I do approximately maybe 15 to 20 tours a year. Now, that gives you an idea over a 30-year period that I've done somewhere between 450 and 600 tours of the local Cowra community. Now, during that time, I thought I'd probably told every story there was to know about Cowra, but Cowra Voices taught me otherwise. Now, it's interesting that oral history has a pretty good tradition in Cowra. I've worked for council for 9 years. Before that, I was involved in tourism. I was the tourism manager here at Cowra, as well as having a number of other jobs, including being involved in the Cowra Breakout Association. Now, back in 2007, Cowra Council very generously supported the Cowra Breakout Association to record a number of interviews about Cowra. And the story was we were going to do interviews about Cowra during World War II without focusing on the story of the Cowra prisoner of war breakout. There were a lot of other things that happened in Cowra. We had a military training camp there. We had the annex of the Lithgow Small Arms Factory established in the Showground Pavilion. We had a CSR factory that was making power alcohol out of grain. And we had the Edgells Cannery established in Cowra in 1943 that was primarily there to put vegetables and fruit into the hands of American troops who were fighting in the South Pacific. Now, I thought they were all stories that would deserve coverage, but you know, we did over 50 interviews at the time of people who lived in Cowra during the Second World War. And even though we said to them right at the start, we don't want to talk about the Cowra breakout, everyone's talked about that in the past. Do you know how many people got back to talking about the Cowra breakout? Every person who we interviewed. So it's a pivotal story in Cowra's history. Now, Cowra Voices comes along. And as Masako said, Cowra took it up pretty enthusiastically. We have 19 locals there who spoke on the Cowra Voices app, telling stories about what their memories of Cowra are in regard to developments of peace and reconciliation that came out of that tragedy of war back in 1944. Now, we had a lot of organisations involved: Cowra Tourism, Cowra Council, Cowra Breakout Association, the Bruce and Margaret Weir Trust, which is a trust based on the family of Margaret Weir, May Weir, sorry, who was the lady who gave the tea and scones to the Japanese prisoners of war on the day after the breakout. Now, they showed their support, and we ended up with this wonderful telling of the Cowra story, of aspects of that reconciliation, peace and understanding that had developed, told by Cowra locals. Now, how do we use that? We've got a wonderful app, and I, at the Visitor Centre, you hand out this brochure every day and say to people, download it. But what I found during my tours, suddenly here was this very engaging way of telling stories about Cowra, where they didn't have to listen to me going on like this, on and on and on, telling my subjective stories of Cowra. I could say to them, get your phone out, download this and listen to it. And what I do now in every tour is I take a Bluetooth speaker with me and I go to the sites where these recordings are made. And I go to those sites, and in particular, the one I always mention is when we go to the Japanese War Cemetery. There you've got the graves of those Japanese who died during the breakout, and the graves of every other Japanese citizen who died in Australia during World War II. And I'll go to one of the graves and I'll place that speaker down and I'll play the audio from Cowra Voices. and let them listen to that story. And immediately there's this engagement that you can't get if it's one person just talking on and on. They hear stories of individuals. They hear stories of why that individual was here in Cowra and how their overall story goes into the story of reconciliation and peace and understanding that's developed between what is a relatively small town of Cowra. Yes, we only have 12,500 people in Cowra Shire, but I always think we bat above our weight for the way we tell our stories and the engagement we get outside the Cowra community. How many other towns in Australia can say that they regularly get diplomatic visits, not only from Japan, but also from the other nations that were involved in the prisoner of war camp? And you have the Italians and also the Indonesians. Stories that are all told in Cowra Voices. So can I just have a show of hands? How many of you can put your hands up and say you've downloaded Cowra Voices at this time and had a quick listen to some of it? And that's a pretty good indication. Cowra Voices is a wonderful resource. To me, as somebody who takes tours around Cowra all the time, it's added a whole new way of using oral history to tell stories. I love oral history. I've used it myself. I've done a number of books, primarily railway histories or local histories about this area and surrounding areas. And I've always used oral history. I've always recorded people and then used their quotes from those interviews that I've done. But to actually be able to play those interviews, professionally recorded, and to be able to say to people, this is what people know about the stories from their own experiences. I think that adds a whole new element to telling the story of Cowra. To me, it's one of the great things that we've ever been able to do. And I can't thank the Cowra Voices team enough for having the enthusiasm and I suppose the ability to take something which was a way of telling the stories and putting it into this concise little app that gives you a wonderful opportunity to take with you the tour guide in your pocket. And when I was at the visitor centre, and we've had an incredibly busy time here at Cowra since COVID, you would think that you know, the towns would close down, but the rural areas of New South Wales have gone through the roof. Places like the Japanese Garden and the Cowra Visitor Centre, we're getting 3 times the number of people we would normally get through at the moment. And over that long weekend, only at the beginning of this month, the number of these brochures for Cowra Voices that I handed out. And I said to people, this is like having a tour guide in your pocket. And the only thing that's better than having the tour guide with you is that you can pick what you want to listen to and you can pick which site you're at rather than the tour guide taking you around from spot to spot to spot. So from my perspective, it's given me a wonderful tool in my armoury of things to, when I'm telling the Cowra story to other people. But to the people who don't have a tour guide with them, it is the absolute example of how oral history can be the best way to tell the stories of local community and local community events. And I would absolutely encourage you to use it, to download it, to have a listen to it if you haven't. And if you come to Cowra, don't bother coming to the visitor centre and saying you need Lawrence Ryde to take you around, because he'll only tell you download the Cowra Voices app. So look, if you've got any questions, I'm used to speaking to groups of people, so I'm always happy to answer questions. So if you have any questions while we're going, please don't be afraid to ask now, and I'll try and tell you a little bit about you know, specifics you might want to know.
Can I just butt in here? So I think one of the things you said recently on an interview on the radio about Cowra Voices, Lawrence, and I just wanted to talk to the others about this, but the people that are buried in the Japanese cemetery, because they're dead and they can't speak for themselves. And what we've done in the app is to actually bring their stories to life by getting as much documentation as possible, doing some great historical research, and we've got some actors to talk about their personal stories. So that's a way of bringing to life that particular gravestone or plaque. So can you just talk about that when you take people to the Japanese cemetery?
I sure can. I specifically go up and I give a general overview of the story of the Australian and Japanese war cemeteries. And when we move into the Japanese war cemetery, you've got a fairly large area that contains 524 graves. The majority of them are actually civilian internees who died in Australia during World War II. So their stories are there. You've also got the people who died during the breakout. And those people, each and every one of those people has an individual story, and you can't possibly tell them all. You can't possibly go in and describe the lives of those people. Yes, there's information on a wonderful database that's available as well on their lives, but it's only the bare bones, the names, their addresses, what they did in the military or what they were doing in Australia. But Cowra Voices gives you an opportunity to drill down, and there's selected sites. And you can take your phone and the Bluetooth speaker, you can go and stand next to someone's grave. Now, I don't know how this will pick up, but this is the one I always use. Let me just, bear with me for a second. I'm just going to show you. And this is all I do. I say, if you would ask me the question of who is the most famous person buried in the cemetery, and I say, his name in Cowra was Tadao Minami, and this is what it plays.
Tadao Minami is perhaps the most well-known of all the prisoners.
Can you hear that okay?
Buried here. He signaled the prisoners to escape by blowing his bugle, the start of the Cowra breakout.
And it goes on and it tells his military history, the Zero fighter pilot, how he was shot down, how he came to Cowra, how he spoke English, so he became friends with the guards. Tadao Minami wasn't his real name. You'll learn all that story as you go along. And when you come to the end of the story and you are listening to the wrap up and you think to yourself, I wonder why he has been chosen specifically. And
Escape. Hajime was one of them. Hajime Toyoshima, also known as Tadao Minami, rests here in Cowra. His bugle rests in Canberra in the Australian War Memorial.
And I get choked up listening to those stories. And I look around at the people and I see them all with tears in their eyes. And I think to myself, they're hearing stories about people who are only names. But hearing those stories, not firsthand, but told by a professional actor, telling the exact stories at the site standing next to that man's grave. And I think to myself, isn't that a wonderful way of telling history, of telling the stories of that's gone on that make this Cowra-Japan relationship so special? To me, I can't say to you how good it is, because all I can say is this: if I've done 600 tours of Cowra and I listen to those stories and I get tears in my own eyes every time I listen to it, I think it tells you how well those stories are told. So certainly, it just shows you how powerful having a tool that relies on oral history as its foundation and how well it works in the selling of a particular story. And yes, Cowra has this amazing story of this, how from this tragic event, the only land battle fought in the whole of Australia during the Second World War, something so positive has come out of it. But there's never been a better tool for telling that story, the tragedy and the positivity, than listening to Cowra Voices.
I just want to add to that. Thank you, Lawrence. Whenever you speak, it's very moving. I just want to add that all those stories that were in this cemetery, those individual stories, they were researched. They've been researched for many, many years by Mayu Kanamori was part of this project, which is an online database of all of the 524 people in the cemetery, and that's actually Cowra Voices kind of grew out of that project, because we started thinking, well, how can we bring these dead people's lives to the people that visit? Now, how can we sort of get people to see that they're actually people rather than just a plaque or a name? And that's kind of where it grew out of. So behind those stories, they're about, 3 or 4 minute stories. There's this years and years of historical research done by historical researchers here in Australia. So I just wanted to add that. Is there anything else that maybe Jackie or Chia or Mayu wanted to add, just while we've got the captive audience on Zoom?
Well, can you hear me?
Yep.
Am I muted? Oh, I just wanted to add that the power of the stories really comes from the fact that it is something that I've heard from the people of Cowra, like Lawrence, for a long time, you know, in his tours or through books. But the power is that they are telling the stories, they, as in the people of Cowra, are telling the stories themselves. And I think that grassroots voices we hear is what Cowra is, because the peace and reconciliation process has begun and is being continued on a grassroots level in Cowra. Of course, there's civic leaders involved as well, but the day-to-day, you know, whether it's the Seikei School Exchange, it's the oldest student exchange program that's being done by students, teachers, everyday people in Cowra. And it's so wonderful to be able to bring all of those different stories, how the Peace Bell came to be in Cowra, how the Japanese Gardens came to be, how it was developed, to all come together in one app.
Thank you all. That's wonderful to hear more about the project. Does anyone have any questions for Masako or Lawrence or Mayu?
I've also put a link to the app and to Anne's book in the chat if you'd like to, if you're looking for the direct links.
Which is it's worth listening to even if you're not in Cowra on the site. It's just it's a really beautiful listen. If we don't have any questions from anyone, I'll say thank you again. It was just fantastic. It's great to not only get through the kind of important logistics of an AGM, but also to hear about some oral history work that's being done, some really exciting work. So thank you all for joining us, and to Anne as well, and congratulations to you all again on your awards.